Good morning and welcome to Veterans Heartbeat on the Pulse of the Veteran, where we discuss issues of health, happiness, opportunity, and well-being of interest to the veteran community, their families, and the community who honors them.
Good morning and welcome to another episode of Veterans Heartbeat, brought to you by River, the Rural Institute for Veterans Education and Research. My name is Jason Zencraft. My co-host Ed Lasofsky is here with me, and he is the Executive Director of River. We welcome you to a weekly wide-ranging discussion of issues, events, opportunities, and needs in our veteran community. Morning, Ed. How you doing?
Morning, Jason.
We'd also like to thank our sponsor, Farside Signs. They create amazing-looking vehicle graphics that will drive traffic to your business. They are located at 1526 South Avenue West in Missoula. Follow them on the web, Instagram, and Facebook, or just stop on by.
Well, as I've said before, we're in New Zealand presenting at the International Suicide Prevention, so this was pre-recorded, so if there is a big news story, I apologize we didn't get it into this episode. This morning, we're talking to Russ Fagg, who is one of the other Senate candidates on the Republican side. Good morning, Mr. Fagg.
Good morning, Ed and Jason. It is great to be with you.
So, you're running for the U.S. Senate. You've had a very distinguished political career here in the great state of Montana. I've been looking and I can't find anything on your stance on veterans issues, and that's what the show is focused on. So
Absolutely.
Let's get started on that issue. What is your issue?
Well, I recognize that Montana per capita, I think, is second in the nation in veterans. I think about 1 out of 10 Montanans are veterans. It's a critical issue for Montanans and for our country. And I guess my bottom line is I appreciate people that have served our country, and I think we need to take care of them. I mean, they put their life on the line for our country, and that's a debt that is difficult to repay, if not impossible. And so what we can do as a country is take care of our veterans, and we need to do that.
Well, you were a judge for a number of years. I'm sure that you saw some veterans that you felt like could have been helped before they got before your bench. Do you have any stories you want to talk about?
Oh, sure. I was a judge for 22 years, and during that time I handled about 25,000 cases. And I'd like to say I've seen the best in humanity, and I've seen the worst in humanity. And yes, unfortunately, I have had a number of veterans in front of me, both in family law cases, even a couple of civil cases that I can think of, and unfortunately, even some criminal cases where veterans, generally, I don't want to generalize too much, but had some PTSD or some things going on and got themselves on the wrong end of the law. And so, yes, I've seen some of those issues, and I'm not going to say I'm an expert. I'm certainly not an expert, but because I've seen them firsthand, I think I understand some of the issues that veterans face, those issues that will even bring them into court, probably more than most candidates.
Well, I want to bring up an interesting dilemma that most veterans find themselves in, and that is the delineation of the 10th Amendment. Okay? So for medical care, and you being an attorney and a former judge, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. For medical care in Montana, the practitioners are all licensed by the state of Montana.
Right.
And their care, if you get care in Montana by a licensed practitioner, it's under the Medical Board of Montana. But since the VA pays for medical care and they put these centers in that the medical board can't oversee, the veteran is caught in this quasi, am I a state citizen or am I covered under federal law? Would you like to address that a little bit?
Well, let's start with the basics. I kind of like to peel the onion back, so to speak. So the 10th Amendment basically says anything that is not specifically expressly given to the national government or the federal government is reserved for the states. I'm a big believer in states' rights. I'm a big believer in enforcing the Constitution generally, from the First Amendment all the way through, but also the 10th Amendment. And so I think that is a problem, is exactly what you said. State medical doctors are licensed by the state of Montana. Of course, you've got this federal agency called the Veterans Administration, and so there is a little bit of a conflict, but I don't think it's a huge conflict because I think the physicians that are hired by the Veterans Administration have to become licensed in Montana, but that typically is not much of an issue as long as they're in good standing in whatever state they are licensed in. So could you take me a step further and maybe dig into what the issues are as you understand them?
Well, there was a physician that was practicing at the VA here in Montana. He had several malpractice claims against him. Then he moved to another state where they finally got his license. But in the meantime, several veterans here suffered harm from that individual. And so it's because the medical board does not oversee the VA care, it kind of puts the veteran in a precarious position.
I believe, Ed and Jason, in that circumstance, if there was a breach of care by the physician, then he has a remedy through a medical malpractice case. And if he was practicing in Montana, then he had the credentials to practice in Montana. And I believe he would have a claim if there was a breach of care, a negligence claim against that physician. I don't think there would be any problem as long as he was able to get an attorney that would handle the case in bringing that claim.
So in the veterans world, we have in the state of Montana a constitutional provision that gives veterans a certain leg up, per se. Do you know which?
So the veteran's preference is what you're referencing?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Can you explain that to our audience? Because I don't think they understand that.
So basically, whether it's a job, whether it's a contract, whatever situation is present, there's always a metric that is involved, where the person who's hiring or giving a job or an RFP has to put in certain numbers. 1 through 100 typically would be the scale for different things. And then there's a veteran's preference of, I think it's often 10%. I don't know if there's a number that goes with it, but I think that's kind of generally what happens. And so if you're rating, person A and person B, and person A comes up with, let's just say it's 82 points, and then person B, who is a veteran, he may come in at 78 points, so he's 5 points behind, but then you give him that preference, him or her that preference, or their company that preference, and then they would get selected because of that veteran's preference. That's how it works.
Well, that's pretty nice of the state of Montana to do for the veterans, isn't it?
Yes, I think they're absolutely trying to understand and give credit to the fact that these people have served their country.
Now, you've been endorsed by several very popular Republican politicians.
Yes.
Care to mention any and care to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I'd love to, Ed and Jason. I'm very grateful. When I started this, I wasn't sure I was going to go, but I talked to numerous people across the state, and I'm just grateful I've been endorsed by former Governor Mark Roscoe, the late Governor Judy Martz, former Governor Stan Stevens, Congressman Rick Hill, Congressman Denny Rehberg, Phyllis Burns, wife of our beloved Conrad Burns. I've been endorsed by David Keene, former president of the NRA and former chairman of the American Conservative Union. And I've also been endorsed by over 70 Montanans who have served in the Montana legislature. And what I tell people is, they know all of the candidates, and yet they have taken the step of endorsing me. And as Governor Roscoe said, he said, Russ, I was the head of the RNC, Republican National Committee, under President Bush. I typically don't get involved in primaries, but I am going to support you because, A, I think you'd be an excellent senator, and B, you are the only one who can defeat Senator Tester, which at the end of the day is the goal. But I tell people also when I'm speaking to crowds, as much as I am grateful for that support, I am here, and I'm here on your show to try to earn your support, you two, and anybody else who is listening to this program, because that's the goal at the end of the day.
I get that we've got to beat Tester. I've heard that from all the candidates because that is a goal.
Absolutely.
Why do you think we need to beat Tester? And I'm not trying to play gotcha here. I'm just asking your opinion.
Oh, that's a legitimate question, and it has to be asked. The reason we need to beat Jon Tester is because he is not representing Montana. He's not representing Montana veterans. He's not representing Montanans. He is out of touch with Montana. And let's talk about that for a minute. He was one of 18 to vote to continue the government shutdown. That was detrimental to Montana children and Montana veterans. He voted against the tax reform package. That tax reform package is going to help 90% of Montanans. That means 90% of veterans are going to be helped by that tax reform package. Jon Tester voted against it. Jon Tester voted against Judge Gorsuch, who is going to be a staunch supporter of the Second Amendment. He's a fellow Westerner. He believes in limited government, individual responsibility. He believes in judges following the law, not making the law. That's very much a Montana value. Jon Tester voted against him. Jon Tester voted against the Pain-Capable Abortion Act, which prohibited abortions past 20 weeks, which is 5 months. I think most Montanans would say that is appropriate. So Jon Tester supported the Iran deal. Jon Tester was the deciding vote for the Affordable Care Act. We know what a disaster that has been. Of course, Jon Tester championed the Dodd-Frank Act, and we know what a disaster that has been for Montana banks and credit unions. Just time and time again, Jon has done what is best for his liberal supporters on the east and west coast to the detriment of Montanans, and that includes veterans. And so that's what I mean by he is out of touch with Montana. I think I have a theory on this. He was the chairman of the Democratic Senatorial Committee, and in order to get that position, he promised Chuck Schumer, I'll do whatever you ask me or tell me to do. And he, by golly, he's lived up to that word. And so that's frustrating to me. Yes, it has helped him raise a lot of money. I think at last count, he had raised something like $12 million. But he's voting contrary to mainstream Montanans, including veterans. So that's the bottom line. He has lost touch. He's gone Washington. He's been back there 12 years, and it is time to send him back to his farm. So
in the veterans world, do you know of any votes or anything that he's done against the veterans?
Well, this is what I say, Ed and Jason. I've talked to well over 100 veterans as I've been on the trail for the last 6 months, and I've asked them, are you better off now than you were 11 years ago when Jon Tester became a United States Senator? And, oh, by the way, Jon has made veterans really probably his number one issue. And the lion's share of them, probably 80%, say, I am no better off or I am worse off than I was 11 years ago. And so, I guess I'm going to, put your money where your mouth is, John. You talk a big story about helping veterans, but at the end of the day, I don't really think he has done very much to help veterans. I mean, if there's a television camera nearby and it has anything to do with veterans, he'll be in front of it. But where the rubber hits the road, has he really been that effective? And the veterans I've talked to have said, no, he really hasn't been that effective. I think a great example could be the Veterans Choice Program. I think that had good merit and had good potential, but it has been poorly administered, it's been poorly funded, and it hasn't worked. And, that was something that Jon touted, and so all of a sudden now it doesn't work. And so, I guess I will just say this. He talks a good game, but does he really come through? And from the veterans I've talked to, he hasn't.
So what would your number one priority for the veterans be if elected as the U.S. Senator?
I think my number one issue would be medical care. I think that is so critical to veterans. And I like the idea of the Veterans Choice Program. We have some of the finest physicians, some of the finest hospitals and clinics that the nation has to offer. But I talked to a veteran the other day who was down in Miles City. This makes no sense to me. So he had a little bit of foot care, including literally trimming his toenails because he was an older gentleman. And he had to be driven from Miles City to Billings to have that taken care of. And that makes no sense to me because I know there's a physician or a podiatrist in Miles City who could take care of that. I mean, it's very costly. It's very inefficient. And, of course, he doesn't want to have to spend the whole day going down to Billings to have this minor situation taken care of. So I think that's a good example where the Veterans Administration has the clout to say to somebody like a Miles City Health Clinic, hey, why don't you take care of our veterans? Because we have so much volume, yes, we're going to ask you to give us a reasonable price for that care, but we will send you our veterans in that situation. To me, that's a real win-win. But the problem is, as you guys know, some physicians are backed up 9, 10, 11 months before they get paid. And of course, they have to pay their staff. They have their overhead. And so they don't want to have to deal with having to wait 10, or I've even heard one physician tell me sometimes it's 15 months before he's been paid. Well, that's ridiculous. That just doesn't work. It just shows what a bureaucratic system that has become. And those are the sorts of things that we need to clean up, and that I will clean up when I am representing Montana in the United States Senate.
So, as an attorney, what is the number one legal issue facing the veterans today, would you say, in Montana? What's the number one thing that you see that veterans need legal help with?
You know, I've had a lot of veterans in my courtroom, primarily for family law disputes. And obviously it would be beneficial if they had an attorney when they're in some sort of a family law dispute, whether it's a parenting plan, whether it's a child support issue, whether it's distribution of assets and debts. Probably the second place is, like I said, I've seen veterans in my courtroom for criminal cases. If they are not able to afford a private attorney, of course, we do have a public defender system, and our public defenders, at least in Yellowstone County, are pretty darn competent attorneys. So I guess to answer your question, Jason and Ed, the number one concern I would probably say is assistance with an attorney in family law issues that veterans face.
Yeah, it's a shame that we don't have more programs like the River program that really focuses on prevention of a divorce rather than being there at the end.
Absolutely. You know, if we can prevent a divorce, it's going to be better for everybody, especially, you know, both parties. And if there's any children involved, certainly better for the children if that can be. You know, I talk to children all the time when I was a judge, and I'd ask them, hey, I can't grant you your 3 wishes, but if I could grant you 3 wishes, anything in the world, what would your 3 wishes be? And almost invariably, one of their wishes is, I wish my mom and dad would stay together. You know, they understand that there's conflict between mom and dad, but they still want their parents to be together. And I think, you know, we can all understand that. As, you know, I know my parents had their fair share of disagreements, but you still want them to be together.
Well, Russ, we got about 5 minutes left, and we want to make sure that you have time to address any of the other issues that may or may not be veteran-related that you're passionate about while you're running for this position. What are some of the things that you want to focus on?
You know, what I want to focus on is economic opportunity for all Montanans. And to me, that starts with our number one resource, which is our young people. Even since I was going to high school, I'm a 4th-generation Montanan. I graduated from Billings Senior in 1979, and even as far back as the 70s, some of our best and brightest were leaving the state to get good economic jobs. And I think that's a shame, especially here in Montana when we have so many natural resources that are not being well developed. And I think as a judge, I handled 25,000 cases. I've looked at both sides of issues, and I've had the ability to make hard decisions, and that's what we're going to have to do in the United States Senate. You know, timber is such a great example. About a third of Montana is publicly owned. A lot of that in western Montana have these beautiful forests. In 1970, we had 40 sawmills in Montana. Today, we have about 5. And as a consequence, we're not developing this natural resource of timber like we should. Last year, we had 1.2 million acres burn up, and anybody who lived in Montana was subject to the smoke. And that's just bad stewardship. We need to develop our resources in a sustainable way so that the next generation will have jobs and opportunity. And that's what I'm really concerned about. I think the number one issue facing the nation is our budget deficit, $21 trillion and growing each year. It is just unconscionable, this debt that we're passing along to the next generation. And probably the last thing I want to talk about is who can defeat Jon Tester. We've got 4 people in this primary. My other three opponents are fine people, each and every one of them. But who can defeat Jon Tester in November? So let's talk about that for a minute. Al is a good guy, Al Olszewski, just not getting a lot of traction, just does not raise a lot of money, doesn't have a team behind him. Troy is another fine guy. I like him a lot. He's got a good story. But being from California and living up the Yellowstone Club is just not going to work in a general election. Matt, of course, is from Maryland. He's been here about 15 years. He has flip-flopped on the federal lands issue. In 2014, he said during his congressional race, we should sell the federal lands. Now he's changed his mind. You have to ask, is that just for political expediency? You know, this whole idea of coming to Montana and launching a political career is troublesome to a lot of people. In fact, when we were at our debate down in Bozeman, the first debate that we had, the question was asked, hey, if you're elected, a Democrat is going to appoint for your position. Isn't that a concern? And this is what he said. He said, quote, quite frankly, it doesn't matter who the auditor is, unquote. Well, I totally disagree. It's important who the auditor is. A seat on the land board takes care of health insurance, and I want a Republican who's got Republican principles on that land board seat taking care of insurance issues as well. So I think it is important, and I think that's a concern. And then we look at the out-of-state money and the out-of-state endorsement that Matt has been getting, including Steve Bannon, who is really a destroyer of the Republican Party. And then last, you know, we all talk about trying to clean up Washington, which I am in favor of 100%. But right here in Montana, Matt's on this 19-city tour paid for by a state slush fund right in the middle of a campaign. That just doesn't smell right. And so Matt's got these serious headwinds as well. On the other hand, you've got myself, who's got these Montana endorsements from Governor Roscoe to Rick Hill. I've got the Montana roots. I'm a fourth-generation Montanan with the judicial background, with the legislative background. I'm very community active and also active in my church. And last, I've got the Montana support. I've got almost 1,000 Montanans who have donated to this campaign, raising almost $1 million. I am so grateful for that. In fact, I believe I picked up more support from Montanans than all three of my primary opponents combined. So I think that's the ticket, that grassroots support from Montana that's going to take it to Jon Tester in November. And I think that's what people need to think about when they pull that lever on June 5th, is who can defeat Jon Tester. And I think Russ Fagg, who has those Montana endorsements, those Montana roots, and that Montana support, is the guy that can get the job done.
Well, there you go, folks. What more can we say, right, Russ?
Yeah, I think you said it better than any of us could.
So,
well, I really appreciate, Jason and Ed, that you have me on the show. I really appreciate veterans and the service they provided to our country, and I would very much like them to look at me for their candidate. They can check me out at russformontana.com. If they want to call me and visit about anything, my personal cell number is 406-855-0224, and would very much like to have your support as well as the listeners on your show.
Well, thank you very much for coming on Veterans Heartbeat.
Thank you, Ed and Jason, and God bless each of you and everybody who's listening.
You too, Russ. Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. Stay well.
Well, I hope that your listeners enjoyed that episode. Just for the record, River does not endorse any of these candidates. We really don't even endorse Republican or Democrat. We really endorse veterans issues. Now, whether they come from the left, the right, center, we don't really care. As long as they're for the veterans of Montana, that's where we stand.
Well, I think it's important that we let the veterans hear from the people that are going to represent us, especially on the issues that we care about. To me, I think the biggest issue that we need to be looking very, very hard at is how do these veterans become reintegrated back into Montana? We take them out, and we owe it to them to provide a reintegration path that includes the family.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at history, I mean, Spartans, they would come back from war. They'd come back from battle. What would they do? They would stay on the outside of a village. And the reason they would stay on the outside is to reacclimate themselves. They're going from this hectic, chaotic, violent world back into normal civilian life. Well, if you can call it civilian life back then. So they had that reintegration phase. Even back then, the Spartans knew how to help reintegrate. And I'm sure it wasn't necessarily the best. I'm sure a few heads rolled back then. But even back then, they knew that something needed to be done. And I think that's something that we need to focus on more. We obviously at River focus on it quite a bit, but I think it's something that the VA really needs to take under their wing and focus on, whether it's recreational therapy, whether it's vocational training, whatever it is. I think that needs to be addressed a little bit stronger. And they do have transitional assistance programs out there, and I think those are very beneficial for certain veterans, but there clearly is an issue. I think it's very cut and dry that there is a reintegration issue. You ask any veteran out there. So, I'd like to see more focus on that.
Well, we're closing up this show, but I will say that the reintegration, the things that we're seeing in the veterans world are a symptom of the reintegration. The veteran suicide, the unemployment rates, the divorces, all of it.
Absolutely. Coming back with chronic pain, maybe some PTSD, maybe some TBI, a different lifestyle, different mindset, different outlook. It's just a bad concoction. So the more angles we can approach it with, the better. Not, just physical health. Just mental health. Nope, just get them a job. No, it's a whole multitude of issues that need to be addressed depending on the individual, because everybody is different. One guy or gal may have, 2 specific issues. Another may have 15. So it's important to really take it case by case and try to have the best treatment available.
So thank you very much for listening to Veterans Heartbeat. We'd not be able to bring it to you without all the support of the listeners. And thank you again to Farside Signs for sponsoring the show. If you do need a unique vehicle design, swing on by and check them out. Also, thank you to our main sponsor, River. River has an array of services such as veterans-focused education, a vestibular disorder clinic, and now non-pharmaceutical treatments for pain, anxiety, and depression. Check them out on Facebook or on the web at riverofchange.org. Lastly, we'd like to show our appreciation to all of our veterans. Thank you for serving our country and keeping it safe.